looking beyond when we're on the other side of this curve, are we looking at living with some sort of social distancing guidelines essentially until there's treatment or a vaccine? For example, people looking forward to the summer talk about going to baseball games, going to concerts. We have political conventions over the summer. Are things like that possible or safe without a vaccine or a treatment in place?
Yeah, I think if we get to the part of the curve that Dr. Birx showed yesterday, when it goes down to essentially no new cases, no deaths at a period of time, I think it makes sense that you're going to have to relax social distancing. The one thing we hopefully would have in place, and I believe we will have in place, is a much more robust system to be able to identify someone who's infected, isolate them, and then do contact tracing. Because if you have a really good program of containment that prevents you from ever having to get into mitigation, we're in mitigation right now. That's what the social and physical distancing is. The ultimate solution to a virus that might keep coming back would be a vaccine. In fact, I was on the weekly conference call with the WHO-sponsored group of all the health leaders in the world who are dealing with this. And we all came to the agreement that we may have cycling with another season. We'll be much better prepared. We likely will have interventions. But the ultimate game changer in this will be a vaccine, the same way a vaccine for other diseases that were scourges in the past that now we don't even worry about.
And Tony, how are they doing with the vaccines, Tony?
I mean, the vaccine is, as I said, it's on target. We're still in phase 1. There were 3 doses that we had to test. We've been through the first 2 doses. We're on the highest dose now. When we get that data, it'll take a few months to get the data to feel confident to go to the phase 2. And then a few months from now, we'll be in phase 2. And I think we're right on target for the year to a year and a half.
And do you mind me asking, you and Dr. Birx, have either of you received threats of any kind, or have you been given a security detail, given that you've been out here every day on camera speaking?
Well, I mean, anything that has to do with security detail, I'd have to have you refer that question to the Inspector General of HHS rather than my answer that.
Can I follow up on testing?
He doesn't need security. Everybody loves him.
Can I follow up on testing?
I said they'd be in big trouble if they ever attack. You know, he was a great basketball player. Did anybody know that? He was a little on the short side for the NBA, but he was talented. He won a game. I read the story. He won a game that was unwinnable against a great team. And his whole team said, we can't beat this team. And he went in and they won the game, right? That was a couple of years ago. But
a few years ago.
The head never changes. The attitude never changes.
Could I ask Dr. I don't want to hit you with everything that's coming along, but a lot of people who are watching television today heard from a researcher named Dr. Jacob Granville, who's come up with a potential antibody therapy that he has given to USAMRIID. Just wanted to know if you know anything about this, what you might be able to tell people at home about it who have seen it.
You know, John, I don't know specifically this individual, what they're doing, but I can tell you there's a lot of activity that is centered around a passive transfer of antibodies in the form of convalescent plasma. One, the number is to get immune globulin that you precipitate out of the plasma, and another is monoclonal antibody. It's based on the same principle of if you have a protective antibody, passive transfer of that could provide not only protection prophylactically, but also treatment. This is an old concept. In fact, immunology was born decades and decades and decades ago with the concept of giving passive transfer of serum to an individual to protect them from an infection. So I wouldn't be surprised if he and a number of other people are pursuing this. It's the right thing to do.
Can I follow up on antibody testing, please, Dr. Fauci? At what point can we as a country expect there to be a widespread antibody testing so we know exactly what we're dealing with here, as well as other questions such as, when can people who are deemed to be healthy donate blood, for example?
Okay. So when you talk about antibody testing, there are a couple of things that you want to do. You want to find out if someone has been infected and whether or not they're going to ultimately wind up being protected. Antibody testing right now is not the first thing on our priority. It's something that we need to do is testing to see if someone is infected. it is very important ultimately to be able to get a feel for what the penetrance of the infection was in society for a number of reasons. You get a better feel of what the impact has been, but also you get a better feel of what the herd immunity would be. So I can foresee in the future that when we get the facility, which we'll have for sure, I mean, ultimately you can get a test that could do this reasonably easy, and do the kind of what we call serosurveillance study. This is very analogous that Dr. Birx and I were talking about that a lot. And that is back in the day when she and I were both doing the HIV/AIDS issues, back when we first discovered the virus in '83 and we had an antibody test in 1985. We found out by serial surveillance, representative in different populations, that we were dealing with the tip of the iceberg when we saw individuals who were the ones who actually got infected. It gave us a really good feel for how many people were infected, how many are doing well, and how many are getting ill. I foresee that we'll have that same sort of information, which will be important information. But right now, that's not our immediate problem.
It's not your priority, but can you give a sense of whether it will happen this year?
Let me just follow up with that, because I think, as I discussed before, we had I just want to thank all the epidemiologists and scientists out there who worked with us over the last 4 weeks on models. They really, many came forward and really supported us. Right now we're in talks with a whole series of universities. We have the most brilliant scientists in the world in our universities in state after state. Some of them public health universities, some of them basic science. All of them have received NIH grants for HIV or other development of assays in the past. I've talked to a lot of them over the last few days to really ask them to develop these simple ELISA tests that could be used rapidly in their healthcare centers, because immediately it's easy to do. We've all developed ELISAs. So in a day or two after development, they could screen their entire hospital. I think that would be very reassuring to the healthcare workers who have been on the front line. We worry about them every day. And so I've really called on every university and every state to develop ELISAs. You can buy the antigens and the controls online and really work to test entire healthcare communities in your states and support them that way. At the same time, we worked in sub-Saharan Africa on what we call dry blood spots. So we're looking at, could you use that in a community while we work on the point of care test, where you just dot blood onto this paper, and then that can go into the lab and be analyzed. That would allow us to look in nursing homes and other long-term care facilities immediately. And then finally, we've reached out to the developers of the rapid test, the ones who developed it for malaria, the ones that developed them for HIV. It's exactly the same concept and process, to ask them to rapidly develop these tests, because I think we owe it to the frontline healthcare providers, not only to provide them RNA tests, but many of them have been on the front line now for 4 weeks, may have become exposed. We now know they're asymptomatic. And I think really being able to tell them the peace of mind that would come from knowing you already were infected, you have antibody, you're safe from reinfection 99.9% of the time. And so this, I think, would be very reassuring to our frontline healthcare workers. And our universities can do that by Friday. So I'm putting that challenge out to them to really work on that and do that. That's what we did in the early days. We had ELISAs up and running within days of having the antigen. And so this is what's really possible. So we're not waiting. We're asking for help now.
So potentially this could happen soon, even within this month, if people
It could
take up
happen
that
soon,
challenge?
within this month, if the universities help us. Absolutely.
Dr. Birx, Mr. President, on Florida, Governor DeSantis says that he spoke with you before issuing his
He
stay-at-home
did.
order.
Spoke to me this morning.
He has some loopholes in that for
That I don't know. He spoke to me this morning. He
for
knows what
religious
he's doing.
events, for example.
Very good
Large
judge.
religious groups can meet together. Now that doesn't really agree.
Who can?
Religious groups,
I
like
didn't speak
churches
to him
can
about
meet.
it, but he did speak to me this morning. We talked about it. Please.
Has full mitigation, sir. Does that go against your model? Because that's not full
I
mitigation.
don't know. I'd have to look at what he did.
Back to the healthcare workers on the front lines, following up with Dr. Birx as well. Hazard pay. You have said you have wanted that for the healthcare workers on the front lines. lines. I know Secretary Mnuchin has mentioned something about that possibly in the
I like it.
fourth level of the stimulus
I like
package.
it.
But can you make it happen now? Do we have to wait for a fourth stimulus?
Well, I think it's something we're discussing in terms of bonus or bonus pay. It doesn't have to be called hazard pay. It could be called, hey, look, I watched those people go into hospitals that I know. I talked about one of them, right? But I watched them walk into those hospitals, and they walk in men, women, young, middle-aged, not so many older ones. And I watch them. They're almost like, and I think I take the word almost out, they're like warriors. They're going in. People are cheering. Where there's a building across the street, the people are screaming, they're clapping. They're like heroes.
The Empire State Building.
No, I will tell you, I think it's incredible. They're like warriors. They're like soldiers. And we're gonna be doing something for them. So whether it's bonus, because, you know, we're hopefully going to be over this relatively quickly. It's going to be vicious for a period of time. But hopefully we're going to be over this. You have a lot of questions today. Look at you. You know this young lady behind you?
Never met her before in my life.
We're practicing social distancing.
That's good. That's a good idea.
Makes our marriage strong.
That's good for a marriage, right?
There are a lot of people who are worried about getting sick, and do they end up in a hospital, people who are uninsured, and will they be crushed by medical bills? You were considering last month already, in March, reopening the healthcare.gov exchanges. There has been a determination not to do that. Could you tell us what the rationale was behind that decision, and what you have as an alternative?
Okay, they took that up under the task force, and maybe, Mike, you want to say a few words about that?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And what I can tell you is that the President has made a priority from the outset of our task force work to make sure every American knows that they can have a coronavirus and they don't have to worry about the cost. And we were very inspired as well because of the President's engagement with the leading health insurance companies in the country, that now, so far, 2 of the top health insurance companies in America have announced that they're not only willing to waive copays on testing, and now testing is fully covered because of the bill the President signed for every American, but also that these 2 insurance companies have waived copays on all coronavirus treatment. And I can assure you that as Congress and the President and the administration begin to discuss the next piece of legislation, we're going to make sure that Americans have those costs compensated and covered. Our priority right now is ensuring that every American takes the 30 days to slow the spread to heart. The best thing we can do for one another, for our family's health, for the most vulnerable among us, is practice those mitigation strategies that the President outlined yesterday for the next 30 days. We're dealing with testing to make sure that every American can have a test that needs one. We're dealing with supplies, and we're making great progress in building personal protective equipment and ensuring that ventilators are available, particularly for the communities most impacted. But the American people can be confident that as we move into this, we're going to make sure that our healthcare workers are properly compensated for their extraordinary and courageous work. And we'll make sure that the financial burden on those who end up contracting the coronavirus and dealing with its most serious symptoms also can deal with those issues and deal with those costs.
Understood, Mr.